What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Knives at the Round Table. My name is Marco, and today we're going to be discussing blade shapes and blade grinds. And I decided to address this topic because I think there's a lot of options out there. And whenever I'm doing a review, whenever I'm analyzing a knife, I say some terms and I realize, hey, maybe not everybody's getting exactly what I'm saying. So I decided to do this kind of a guide to grinds and to blade shapes. And by no means am I a knife maker, and by no means is this meant to be exhaustive. Okay, this is not meant to be the end all be all guide on blade shapes or blade grinds. My idea is to try and capture, let's call it 80-90% of the blade shapes and grinds that you're going to see out there when you're trying to purchase a knife, and which one oh man, I'm sorry, and which one might be good for you. So when knives began, you had fairly standard blade shapes, right? This is kind of a very standard blade shape. This is what's called a drop point, and this is for the most part a saber grind, and I'll tell you what that means. But as knives have evolved, and as knife makers have tried to come up with different blade shapes that do different things, as their imaginations have run wild, and as you get knives that are designed for specific purposes, the blade shapes and grinds have just evolved into something that is just weird and bizarre and and really awesome for a knife collector, right? We get more variety. So let's start by talking. Let me get rid of this one, and let's talk about some of the knives. I brought here examples of knives that show different varieties of what I'm talking about. For example, this is the Greg Medford Meaty Marauder, okay? And what you have here is a drop point, and what that means is that the point drops to the point, okay? And I'm not going to go into a lot of the points, but this is what it's called. What you have is very, just a nice round edge. You have a flat area and then a hollow grind. What does that mean? It means that the full thickness of the knife carries from about this point to about that point. Okay, that's what's called the flat. And then they grind the steel to create the edge. But there's different ways in which this can be done, and in this case, they've done what it's called a hollow grind. And what that means is that they take material out from here to here, but they don't take it out in a straight line. Basically, they take it out on a kind of grind wheel, and it is on an arc. Okay, so it makes for a thinner edge, rather than if you go straight out, on a flat grind. So this is what is called a hollow grind, and it usually looks like that. I'm trying to capture the curve. Hopefully that's coming across. So from this point to here, it's you have a curve. Now, on most knives and most production knives, you will get right here at the tip what's called a secondary bevel, and it is going from a thicker portion to the right at the cutting edge. This little area from here to here is called the secondary edge. And for the most part, those are flat grinds. Those are just a little tip that is just flat ground. Sometimes they do it a little bit of a round on the other direction. But for the most part, this secondary bevel, it's just a tiny little flat grind. So what you have here is, now, when knives have a flat and then the grind, the primary grind, this is usually called the saber. Okay, when it has flat and then a grind. So this is a saber hollow ground with a drop point blade. That's what this knife is, and it does have a secondary blade. So I will, as maybe the hollow grind is not the most, usually you have the most abundant blade is going to be a saber grind, with kind of this curved edge, and a flat grind here. Flat grind, draw point. This is a very classical. Most of the knives are going to have a version of that, right? The Bugatti has a version of that, but this one has a smaller flat up here, and then a flat grind, and then a secondary bevel. Okay, but you can see there's similarities between those two blade shapes, even if the grind is not very similar. So I will kind of take this kind of as a base, and then we can start, telling you a little bit of a different grinds. So the next one I want to talk about is one that's very popular because Spyderco has it, and you can see that the cutting edge has some similarities to that, right? It's kind of a curved blade, but what's different about this one is that there's no flat up here. Basically, you start at a thickness of steel up here, and it is ground from the top to the bottom in a single slope. From here to here, it's a single slope until you get to the secondary bevel, and then you have the secondary bevel. Now, what happens with Spyderco is that not only are they flat ground in this direction, they have what is called a distal taper. And a distal taper is, let me try and show you in this view here. As you can see, the Medford carries the full thickness of the blade to about right here, and then you get a tip, right? So you get most of the thickness of the blade for a long length of the blade until about right here, and then it narrows down to the tip. Well, a distal taper means that the blade gets thinner and thinner and thinner from start to finish. So the Spyderco blade is flat ground from here to here. And then it's ground in this direction along the axis of the knife. So it's really, there's never the same thickness in the knife. It's thickest up here, and then it changes linearly this direction, and it changes in thickness in that direction. So that's what you get with Spyderco knives. You have what's called a distal taper. So let's get into some of the other blade shapes that you might have seen. So let's talk about a Tanto Blade. So this is the Chris Reeve aluminum sun, and I think Chris Reeve does one of the best Tanto blades out there. And the Tanto blade means that you have a primary cutting edge and then kind of a secondary cutting edge up here with a distinct point that changes that grind, and that's that point right there. So in this case, you have a flat, so this is kind of a saber grind, right? It's a saber grind with hollow, and then, but this, the cutting edge, it's a Tanto cutting edge as opposed to just the curve of our regular knife. So this, what you get is you get this secondary point that is very useful for draw cuts, right? So, and because they look really awesome. Now, there's different kind of shape. There's kind of different ways of doing a Tanto blade. This one has the slightest curve, but you can tell that there's a very distinct point on which the grind changes direction from here to here. But if I show you the difference to this is the Spyderco PM2. Let me just clean it a little bit. This is the PM2 in a Tanto grind, but you can see here this is absolutely just straight, a straight ground and straight over here. This has a little bit of curves. They're both Tanto blades. They're both recurve. They're both no, not recurves. They're both hollow grounds, right? This is hollow and this is hollow. But you can see in here, the Spyderco carries the flat much lower than the Chris Reeve aluminum sun carries the flat. The flat ends right here on the Chris Reeve aluminum sun. It carries probably lower than 50% of the blade down here, and then you get a hollow. And on the PM2 you have this cutout out here, and that's what it's called, the swedge, right? And it's basically I think it makes the life look cooler, but a lot of times the knife makers do that for balance. If you have a blade that is two blade heavy, okay, then you cut a swedge, so you reduce the amount of steel up here, and it shifts the balance back into the main handle. So there's different ways of doing a Tanto blade. Let me see if I can get you another example here. So this is another example of a Tanto blade. This is the Sharp by Design Micro Evo, and this one, the difference is that it has a harpoon up here. Now in this one, what you see here, this cutout in the middle of the blade along it's what's called a folder. So this one is a hollow grind. So you can see the similarities, right? This is hollow, hollow, and hollow. Okay, they're all Tanto blades. This one has a straight edge as well as this one. This one has a little bit of a curve, but all of them have this distinct point at which the blade changes a grind and direction. Now, for the most part, you can see that the tip on the Spyderco right here, this area, it kind of matches that of the Typhoon. It's far smaller on the it's not really present on the Umnumzon. And what you have here, this is what is called a compound grind. A compound grind, okay, where it goes, there's a certain grind in this direction that is hollow, and then it turns into a flat grind in this area, which makes the tip far more robust. On the Umnumzon, the hollow carries all the way through, and this is basically just the bevel of this cutting edge up here. So you can see that even if you're just talking about Tanto blades, there's a lot of stuff that can be done to make them different one from another. Now, another maybe version of a Tanto blade is the Grimsmo Norseman. And what you see here is you also get that distinct change from one grind to another grind, from one cutting edge to another cutting edge. But in this case, instead of being curved in this direction, this is what we call a recurve. And a recurve blade is a blade shape that is very good for cutting and slicing through things, like just like cardboard. You know, you push through the cardboard and the recurve draws the material in, and it feels very nice to cut in. The only disadvantage of recurve blades is that sharpening, especially on a fixed system, it's a considerable problem, and it's much harder to sharpen. So when the blade curves in this direction, you know, towards the inside of the blade, it's what's called a recurve. So these are both Tantos. This is just a recurve. Now the top of the Grimsmo Norseman is kind of very, very unique, so I'm not even going to try and define it. But what you have here is really a flat, and then this, I'm not sure, it looks like a hollow, but what they've done is they've left the machine marks as their milling marks, you know, as they mill the blade, and that's these lines that you see here. It looks like it's a hollow grind. It's a slight, very tiny hollow on this one. The deeper it is, the slicier it will be, but the edge ends up being a much thinner, right? You can see if I do a slight hollow versus a very prominent hollow, you end up with a sharper edge and with a thinner edge, but it is also a more delicate edge. So hollow grinds, you know, have the advantage of being very slicey, but they're rarely hard use. So now we're gonna move on to, so this has a couple of changes here. Now we're still talking about a hollow grind, right? You can see that there's a hollow ground, and maybe this is the best view for that. Let me see if this shows up. Hopefully you can capture that hollow. And with this one, what you have is what is called a Wharncliffe blade. And a Wharncliffe blade is different from a Tanto blade in the fact that you don't have you end in a point rather than an upswept blade cutting edge over here. Basically, it comes to a very thin point. It's great for draw cuts, and especially with this hollow grind, this is very, very, very slicey. But if you're going to be doing puncturing into things and using your tip, you know, especially if you're trying to do a little bit of prying, I would never recommend prying with any knife. But if you're doing anything, this is not the knife to do it. The knife is so pokey that you really, really should try and avoid it. So this is a Wharncliffe, and Wharncliffes what usually have is a very straight edge. So let me show you the straight edge on, so if you see the PM2, right? This is a straight edge, that's a straight edge, but the Wharncliffe ends right here. That's where it ends. And so it's very utility driven, right? There's a reason that when you go to Home Depot and buy a utility blade, it's in the shape of a Wharncliffe, okay? It has that tip, it has a straight edge. It's very utilitarian, okay? But it is not hard use, okay? You have to be careful. This is more of a slicey knife rather than a hard use knife, okay? Because not a lot of material is carried to the tip. This is a very, 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 very thick tip. I would not recommend you doing any hard work with any Wharncliffe blade. I really wouldn't. So let me talk. So, you know, we've seen a lot of. So this is more of a regular blade, right? This is what I would call a flat grind, right? The flat carries from the top to the bottom. But one thing that makes this one unique. So this is a drop point, right? But one thing that makes this one unique is the orientation of the finish. And that's something that I'm not going to get into too much, but I just wanted to point out the difference that if you have a knife like the PM2 right here, you can see that the grind lines are going up and down on the hollow grind. You can see those, right? And on this one, this is the Custom Knife Factory 520. The lines are going in this. This is what we call a belt satin. Okay, it's usually in the direction of the of the blade. You can also see it on the Micro Typhoon, and this is the Greg Medford, and you can obviously see them there, right? But you can see that the lines are always in the Greg Medford are always perpendicular to the edge, on the Evo Typhoon as well, and on the PM2 as well. And these ones are actually along the axis of the blade. So this is what's usually called a hand rub satin, and it's achieved by getting sandpaper and pulling this way, right? And so this is usually considered a more expensive, a more premium finish than this, even though I personally like these, the look of these better. But I'm gonna keep this one, and the Umnumsam is a stone wash finish, which means that you don't see the grind lines because they've been stone washed away, and it is a more uniform look, because that you get the same look on the flat as you get in the main grind, as opposed to the contrast that you get kind of like here you get in the Greg Medford. So this one is, I like I said, it's a drop point with a curved blade, and it has a flat grind from the top to the bottom. Okay, there's no flat on here, there's no saber. Now there's one variant that I brought so that you can see. Let me get this one away, and that is the Rockstead Higo. And I brought this one because this one has something that none of the others have. So this one is, as you can see, it has a flat, the same as this. Now, where this one is a hollow grind, which means that the blade is like this, okay, it has curved towards the inside of the blade. The Rockstead is curved towards the outside, and that's called a convex grind. But not only that, so that's kind of unique to the Rockstead out of all the knives that you've seen here. The convex grind is used in a lot of harder use knives, because it protects the edge. You carry some more material towards the tip of the blade because it's thicker throughout. They're never as slicey as the hollow grind, because the convex grind carries a lot more material towards the tip. So for example, Bark River, on a lot of their fixed blades, they use a convex grind. Now, one thing that is unique to this one, I don't know if you can appreciate it, is that this one doesn't have a hollow grind. And that is very hard. Not a hollow grind. It doesn't have a secondary bevel. And that is very hard to achieve, okay? To bring your full edge to the sharpest edge is very difficult to achieve. It's much easier to do this kind of grind and leave the edge a little bit thick and then just sharpen the very edge than to get to a very precise point all the way out to the edge. The reason rock studs are so expensive is obviously that mirror polish finish that you see there, their action, the DDP 189, their fit and finish, but the fact that they can do this zero secondary bevel edge grind, so you never get this secondary out here. You see that little area that I've polished to a mirror finish? Well, Rockstud has done it on a radius edge all the way to the tip. So this one is fairly unique in that sense, that it has a convex grind. So this is a saber convex grind with some people call this a Scandi, and a true Scandi is really where you have a flat grind to a zero edge. This is kind of a Scandivex, I've heard it called, where you get to a zero edge, but it is a convex grind. So this is very, 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 very unique. Now, as we get into the more unique blade shapes, I'm gonna show you this one. And this one has a number of different things. So first is this type of shape. It's called a sheep's foot blade, and it is one of the most useful blade shapes out there, where the top kind of makes the sheep's foot kind of shape, right? And the bottom is kind of a full curvature all the way through. So this is very utilitarian. You can use the tip without having to go as far as what you have to do with a drop point. So very utilitarian. So this is a sheep's foot, and maybe I should have started with this, because it's probably second to a traditional blade shape. The sheep's foot is probably the second most useful, and then the Tanto, and then Warncliffe. So the cutting edge of a sheep's foot is really, really good. But this knife, this is the Shirogorov Kami, has a thing that is very unique. If you see the Medford, both sides have been grown identically. So this is a symmetrical knife. Whatever the grind on both sides is the same. That is not the case with the Shirogorov. This has, you can see, a flat and then a single grind and then a secondary bevel, right? Well, as you can see here, there's a flat and then one grind and then a secondary grind to a zero edge at the tip. So this is very unique. This is not a symmetrical blade shape. It has one kind of grind on one side and another kind of a grind on another side. And that is for when you want to do very precise cuts on one side of the blade. It's not quite a chisel grind, because usually chisel grinds don't have the grind on this side. This would be a flat side and all the grind would be on this side. But it's a variant of a chisel grind, because most of the cutting, you get a lot of precision from lining up this edge and then just being able to see, and this is for right-handed people. So this one has a sheep's foot, but it has a double flat grind. It has a flat saber and then a flat grind, a second flat grind, and then it goes to a zero edge on this side, and on this side you get a flat grind, and then a secondary bevel. So this one is kind of unique. Again, I would say that most knives you're gonna find in kind of this blade shape right here, and then probably the second most popular is probably sheep's foot blades, and then you start getting into Tantos and Wharncliffe blades. So hopefully, again, by no means is this meant to be exhaustive, especially you know, there's many more finishes, there's many more tips, there's you know, the blade grinds are just limited by the imagination of the knife maker. But I think that if you take, you know, a classic drop point, a ship's foot, a Tanto, and a Wharncliffe, man, you've hit probably on a lot of them, you know. And with some of the variants that we've covered, recurves, convex, harpoons, and all of those, I think you're set to kind of understanding what people are talking about. Well, guys, hopefully this has been helpful for you. If it was informative, if you enjoyed it, then like and subscribe. And until I see you at the next one, take care.